since I was 16 years old, and then got into personal training, and I was coaching and all through the corporate world, and then started my own advisory firms. And one of them is really focused on helping men in particular. So we help men in basically all aspects of their life. We help them perform better, not only as business leaders, but as husbands, as fathers, as members of the community. So we have this I talk about the three frameworks, and I have the book The Complete Man, but it's really how do you perform at your best, how do you achieve your best, but also how do you be fulfilled in all areas of your life. So those are the things that we focus on, and I'm happy to be talking about this topic because more than ever, especially coming out of COVID, I know that guys need the help. And there's more and more guys that I'm talking to that have mental health challenges and just struggling in different areas and relationship challenges and some even with substance abuse and addiction. So it's a timely topic to really bring to the forefront.
I will agree. And I think there's some people out there that still believe that mental health is more like a gendered issue. They still think it only impacts women, where a lot of men suffer from mental health because suicide is highest among men. And there's a lot of health issues related to the mind and not only on the emotional side that impact men. So, from your standpoint, when you're working with these men, what are some of the challenges that they're facing um, in the world today? Let's start there.
Okay, well, yeah, there's a number of challenges. One is it's almost frowned upon to be a man these days and a strong man and masculinity. So that's the biggest challenge right now. I would say there's a level of confusion for guys that are even under 60. And so I think the 60 plus age still has that old school mentality a little bit. Anybody under has been raised kind of, it really started in the 60s movement, right? Where this feminist movement really shifted people's perception. So I would say, yeah, that's roughly about the right timing where people under 60 have been influenced under this. And then I would say mainly even the youngest generation right now, the new, guy or little boys that are being raised right now, they have no clue what it means to be a man and masculinity. And so I have an 11-year-old boy. I'm very, how do I say, careful in terms of how I raise my son and my daughter. So I'm trying not to put as much pressure on them, but I also know based on the science, and we can talk about that today in the biology, that and what they're teaching in school. If I don't teach them how to be boys, my son to be a boy and my girl to be a girl, no one's going to teach them that in society. It's going to be really like a neutral state. So that's one of the biggest challenges is guys are confused in terms of their role in society, their role in relationships, and their role as a father. Now you put on a whole other layer on it, which is um, we are facing a huge pandemic when it comes to mental health, particularly, I believe, and we've done a lot of research in different areas, not necessarily this, but technology, particularly smartphones, have impacted relationships and they've impacted men as well. So here, let's give a practical example. I'm sitting here on the couch with my wife, and she's scrolling on Instagram, right? So now, rather than us actually connecting with each other, that attention is going somewhere. Or let's just say my wife's sitting there and I'm scrolling on YouTube or whatever that is. So that is happening in relationships. So men and women are becoming more disconnected, or whoever you're in a relationship with, right? So that disconnection is happening, and more men are feeling discontent and unsatisfied in their relationships. So that's another element that's impacting them. Now you even have in the corporate world where men it's almost frowned upon. And this is interesting. The middle-aged white guy, I almost feel sorry for them because it's almost frowned upon to be them these days because they're almost on like a hit list, right? Like guys that have honestly worked their butts off and worked hard to be in that position. Now they're being stereotyped as the middle-aged white guy. They got the job because he's white. So that stuff is blowing stuff out of the water too. And so we have this whole situation. And then you add the stuff that's been coming in from the US. I know you probably have US listeners, but this whole polarity, man, is really driving society into a different direction. And that's impacting us in Canada here now. We're seeing it in our own politics between the liberals and conservatives, right? You got the liberals doing their own thing, and then you got the conservatives that are just it's like they're almost like the Republicans, no offense. And I'm not for or against anybody, but it's almost like let's just tear down the other guy, and that's going to be our platform. And so we have this happening in masculinity as well. So there's a lot of things that we could talk about here, but that's kind of a breakdown in terms of where we are in society for men is we really need a lot of help. And I think one of the areas is mentorship and having these open conversations.
I remember reading a report where it touched on the dynamic between the relationships, let's say 20, 30 years ago, and as you mentioned recently. And they put it to the smartphone. And it was interesting to see that you had a man and a woman, I'm using a heterosexual relationship, how many hours they spent connecting with each other and how many hours they spent on their phone scrolling, as you mentioned. And
Yep.
there was an imbalance. They spend more time on their phone connecting with people that are relatively strangers to them versus
Yep.
their own partner who they live with. And then you take into the fact that, let's say, sexually suggestive images and videos, right? And then that triggers something, especially in young men's minds, where it's like, okay, I want more than that. I want more than that. I want more than that, right? It becomes like an addiction to them. So now they have this skewed view of what their women should be. Now, on the other side, you have women developing this expectation of men from what they see online, not knowing that that isn't reality, that's fantasy. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think sometimes you have it comes across as this old school term of like the conditioning of the mind,
Yep.
where they don't know how to separate the two. And then you made another really good point where there's some people who are growing up not knowing what their role in the world is. And I think a lot of times that's still based on your sex. Like a man has a specific role in the world and a woman has a specific role in the world. But now the lines have been blurred, and you have women saying that I can do everything a man can do, but then when you pull up the jobs that are the most dangerous, the most outside, the long distances is mostly male dominated. And then when you look at the ones that are more indoors, more nurturing, it's more woman dominated. So it's interesting to see how we can say the world is one way, but to your point, when we look at the numbers, it actually shows no, it's still this way and it's been this way for many, many years. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, yeah. I think you said a lot there in those sentences. So let's just break down the first part. I completely agree with you. I think we've overlooked a number of areas, which is basic biology, right? And that's something that we haven't. We as men are bigger in physical stature and size for a particular reason, right? We are built to be dominant from that perspective. We are built to be driven. We are built to take charge. And that's no offense to any women out there, but I think there's a misunderstanding. I'll give you a prime example. There's a huge drive for women to be CEOs, and I think they should be. I think absolutely they should be if that's their aspiration. But I also know many of those women who are burning out at a faster rate who don't necessarily have the same level. I'm talking about a resilience, right? And tenacity. And sometimes it takes that in specific roles. And I'm not saying women are not suited to do that. I'm just saying what ends up happening though is then it knocks them out of their natural balance. And so these women don't feel like they don't have that femininity side to them anymore. They feel like they're losing that. They feel like they're not in touch with themselves, right? Whereas where you talk to men, when they are dominant, they are in touch with themselves. So there's a natural biology and psychology there that we've ignored. We're also taking a look at, and I think there's a food challenge there in terms of what we intake and the pesticides and quality food and hormones. But if you take a look at infertility rates, it's increasing in both men and women, right? So women are having a tougher time getting pregnant, and some of that has to do with men as well. But their fertility rates are being challenged right now. And why is that? Because women are having children later. They're more stressed out, right? And I feel sorry for women because there's a lot of pressure on them to be professionals, to be everything to do with a mom and take care of the house. So there's a lot of pressure on them as well. I believe, if you take a look at people in their natural states, one of my old spiritual mentors said this, and it was really interesting. He said, our time started with men hunting and bringing home meat and women making soup. And he said, our time will end going back to men hunting and bringing home meat and women making soup because that's our natural spiritual biology. And one is not better than the other. That's the other thing too. I think we've lost touch of that. Since when do men and women need to compete? Like what's going on here? We should be complementing each other. That's the beauty of it. I'll give you something that I've been learning myself, even though this is the work that I've been doing, is my wife and I just recently took up dancing together. So my wife has used to salsa dance before we got married. And then when we got married, she stopped doing it. I guess you can't really do that when you're married and go and dance with other guys, right? But I said, I'm a secure guy, and I'll learn or whatever that is. But then we had kids, and then I actually said, you know what, I'll start taking dance lessons. Let's do this, right? Because I know it was important to you, but I'll start doing this. But there's something phenomenal that I learned. And that is when you are dancing as whether let's just say a man or a woman, because that even saying that for some people feels like that's wrong, right? Some people will degrade and say, why are you saying man and woman? Why can't you just keep it neutral? But in this case, I'm going to say because 90% of relationships are heterosexual, I'm going to say man and woman. If you're dancing with your woman, the man is the leader in the dance. And that's what they will teach you. The male teachers, the instructors will teach you that. The female instructors will teach you that. And they will teach you as a man, you need to be a strong leader. If you're not a strong leader, it's going to be hard for the woman to follow you and for you guys to be in step and in sync. And the females will even say that too. And they teach my wife, you got to be a good follower. You got to understand and look for the lead so that way you can dance to your tune. And when we dance, the funny thing is it's all about making the woman look good. We're just there kind of like the pole, right? We're just there to kind of lead. But the woman is the one that's doing all the fancy moves and looking good. No one really looks at the guys, right? But there's a huge lesson that I learned there, which was the whole leading and the following aspect and the natural, you can say, energies and how they combine, because that is the dance for us in life. And we've lost that balance. And when I am not a good leader, we don't dance well. If my wife is not a good follower and she tries to lead, we don't dance well. So that's a real practical example of where we are in society these days, where it's just simple biology, but also the psychology of how we work. When you put two people together, typically one is more of the leader than the other, right? And there's nothing wrong with that.
I wonder if they're trying to maybe rewrite the psychology of it because they can't undo the biology, right? The biology is for those who are into computers, that's like the hardware, right? It's
Yeah.
written. Um, so I want sorry, that's more of the software and it's written inside and it's coded. But everything else, essentially, maybe you can change it. Maybe you can change the psychology of someone to say, hey, I'm in the workforce just as long as Purdeep, just as long as Terrain. I'm naturally going to be competing for the next promotion, the next raise. So if I'm in competition professionally, at what point does it translate or transfer over to your romantic and your personal life? There's a reason why they will say that the higher a woman climbs, the less successful she's in her romantic life, her dating, her marriage. So I'm wondering if there's maybe that connection where they say, okay, I can follow, but I'm having children later, I'm getting married later. So I'm spending more time in a role of having to provide for myself and be in competition with other men. And then I've been doing it for so long now. When I'm ready to be led by a man, I can't find someone,
Yes, yeah.
right?
Yep,
I
yep.
wonder if that's the thinking now. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, yeah. I think you're bang on because my colleagues in the space of relationship psychology, that is one of the biggest factors that they're seeing. Feminine women in their 20s and 30s are having a tough time finding masculine men these days. And so there's a big epidemic that's happening on that side. But I completely agree. There's nothing to say that women are not successful in the workforce and sometimes way more successful than men, right? That's just the nature of the beast. It's when we translate that to our relationship. So if they need to be dominant at work and they use that same psychology and bring it home, it's not going to work for them and it's not going to work for the man in their life. Like my wife is a prime example. She's very educated, has multiple degrees, has a great career, but she says openly herself, I don't want to be this driven. Like I'm making a great career and stuff like that, but she's like, no, I'm losing my femininity. I don't want to work and be driven like this. Like this isn't her natural side. So it really comes down to how do you feel that is your natural state. And I think if you talk to a lot of people, they cannot connect with their